So a lot of, when I first talked to Erin and Derek about their presentations, I didn't get the optimism side. Remember? And I said to you, so what? Can you talk about what works? You kind of looked at me like I was crazy because it was a big dimension of both of your presentations as well as yours. So you weren't even there to infect them with optimism. They came ready-made with it, built in. But I actually want to start with a question for you, Daniel, and that is, in your ideal world, what would you change in urban planning to realize your vision of openness, and how likely will that be to accomplish?
Whoa. Is this on? Can people hear me? Yeah. Well, let me stall a little bit by saying that those two presentations were amazing. Great job. I mean, the papers were great, but the presentations just took it to another level. What was the question again? No, I'm just kidding.
How great was
yeah.
it? That was the question. Weren't they fabulous?
Okay, clearly, first and foremost, we need to just enforce legislation that already exists. We have a Fair Housing Act, 1968, right? We have, and in fact, it says not only do you have to not discriminate, you have to affirmatively further fair housing. The Obama administration has actually been the first administration, really since Nixon's. By the way, George Romney, Mitt Romney's dad, was incredibly progressive on housing issues, and he pushed a really, really integrative agenda. Sort of disappeared for a while, but we're starting to see some signs that HUD now is taking the affirmatively further thing a little bit seriously. They've supported the Anti-Discrimination Center of New York as they do battle with Westchester, who has not honored their commitment to affordable housing. There's a case in San Antonio now. So first and foremost, just enforce progressive legislation that already exists. In addition to that, well, of the 158, or I lost track, weapons, half of those are weapons of inclusion, and some of them are super big, like talking about the Fair Housing Act and talking about housing vouchers. Another really progressive weapon, giving tenants in public housing, as they're doing in a lot of cities around the country, the ability to live where all the goodies are, the good education, the good, which unfortunately in a lot of cases are not in the center of cities, they're often in the suburbs. But there are also lots of little things in our arsenal of inclusion. Funny things like Halloween. We have a whole essay about how on Halloween, boundaries between public and private and one neighborhood or another kind of evaporate, and we talked to a lot of neighborhoods where kids will go from one neighborhood to another that they never go in. Of course, some neighborhoods have set up strategies to stop that by having Halloween on different days of the week, so that they don't have to mix their kids with the other kids coming from the other neighborhoods. But anyway, it's it's got to be approached on so many levels. Policy, we have to change our attitudes, and I could go on and on,
but those are the main ones.
Yeah, Halloween and the Fair Housing Act. Those are the main ones.
We can get done with that. Yeah. So what did you started out by saying in your list of the many things that you and your colleagues were supporting that were quite unpopular with architects and designers, one of them was public housing. Do you agree with Erin that public housing gets a bad rap to a large extent because of issues even with maintenance, that it's not the architecture and design that should get the first slap on the wrist for it?
I agree 100%. I think you figured it out. I mean, seriously, it's not a system. It's a system. It's not about a building. It's about so many interconnected things. That's one of the things that's at the heart of the film, which used to be an essay called The Pruitt-Igoe Myth, right? I mean, I think they get a lot of things right there. That's a architectural, I don't know, architects just want to make themselves seem more important. So it's a building, that determines everything, but it doesn't at all. And it's amazing to see just how people make do and are resourceful with, like I said, what I called lemons. But having said that, it's not like people can only do so much when they're in the situation they're in. like the situation that people who live in public housing today are in, or God forbid, people who lived in St. Louis in the 1960s. There were so many things that had to change to make that building work. The building, maybe it was one, maybe, but maybe not. I think it's a very minor thing.
I want to get to Derek in a second, but just on this issue of housing and urban planning, Jane Jacobs is coming on to her, well, the late Jane Jacobs is coming to the 50th anniversary next year, the celebration of her book, and that changed the way everybody thought about, obviously, towers in the park. Are we seeing a reversal? Is this a backlash?
I think, I don't think there's necessarily a backlash. I think there have always, I think Jacobs was put a little too much emphasis on some of the things that define the West Village. I see Death and Life of Great American Cities as a kind of the best ghost-written biography of the West Village. It explained exactly why that place works so well. When we start taking that and thinking of it as a recipe to apply to other places, that's when I think it works less well. You can find a lot of great places, vibrant, diverse places that work really well, that don't have her generators of diversity, the small streets, the mixed-use blocks, the old and new buildings, and so on and so forth. So, and Jacobs had very little to say about diversity, and she was writing at a time where we were really in a crisis in terms of race, and there's very little in that book. So I think to the degree that people are starting to be critical of that, there's a backlash. But she was an amazing genius and just saw things and was able to describe what was happening in a very good way, and I think was very important and was responsible for a lot of good urban thinking over the decades.
Erin, we're talking on your subject, so weigh in here with us.
I think at this point maybe it's time for a new Death and Life of American Cities.
Really?
I mean, I think that there's obviously, to Dan's point, there's new examples of thriving urban areas that don't look like the West Village. I think that there's a new recipe now. I think that recipe is very custom. I don't think that it can be, if you took all of those things and just applied them to any neighborhood in New York, you wouldn't have success, because anytime I think you try to reinvent a neighborhood to the point of the idea of townhomes, Hope 6 housing, you end up with these weird, like, alternative communities where there are 20 blocks of housing, but there's no grocery store that you can walk to. And that's supposed to be ideal. It was supposed to be the suburbs and supposed to eliminate all these problems of towers. But even in communities, there's one in Portland called New Columbia, they've had the same problems with violence in a Hope 6 community, in something that looks like townhomes. So architecture isn't going to fix societal problems. There's no way. So I think that it's time kind of for a new version of that.
And I think there actually is a nice bridge here with products by way of Anne's presentation from a moment before, because retail is a real factor in terms of how connected people feel to where they live and what they're able to buy and do and fix in the place that they call home. And whether that takes a car ride or a bus ride or is walking around the block, urban planning has a lot to do with the kind of outcomes that we see for the things that we own and the things that we buy.
But it also affects ideas of ownership. I mean, when you talk about going into somebody's property for Halloween or going to another space, I mean, there's certainly, one can see the virtue about having the most diverse possible mixture of people, but there's also an understandable psychological need to mark out one's boundaries, to establish what one owns, and then establish connections to it through different means, including fixing it. Do you see, a threat to the privatization of space?
Quickly, I mean, I think I've blabbed enough, but quickly, I think the model of a good city is not a mixture of a gray wash, of a mixture of everyone and everything. If we think historically about the neighborhoods think about art. Great abstract expressionism, impressionism, all the great movements happened because there was lots of like-minded people living together that actually weren't that diverse. Think about, we have Chinatowns, and we all love them. The model of a good city is not that everybody is just everywhere. It's a model where there are clusters of people who choose, and that's the difference between racial ghettos and ethnic enclaves, right? But to the extent that people can choose where to cluster and be around like-minded people, but to be connected by a network subways, roads, gridded streets, of things that invite other people to come into it and have access to it if they want it. That's the model, I think, of a good city.
So you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit earlier, Erin, about this notion of, in public housing, privacy is not really an issue. Ownership, or rather, privacy is definitely an issue. Ownership is not an issue. What do you see that people can do in public housing in the future that might help them establish closer connections to their living environments and establish a feeling of ownership?
I mean, I think one thing that came up in my research was that a lot of public housing communities were successful, even if the architecture and maintenance were not so much, because there were these kind of built-in communities. There was an example of a tower in Chicago where 3 women had apartments, and each one, the stove didn't work, the shower didn't work, and an additional utility was out. And so they would share between their apartments. And that built these what were called by Carol Stack domestic kin networks. And those things were successful because they could, making the best of a lemon, but they kind of built these communities that ended up being, friendships, almost like family. And I think those things, if you build housing that's based on models like that, I think you're going to get more successful things in the end, because those are things that occur naturally. I mean, you can't force them, obviously, but I think the idea of shared spaces and community kitchens and rooftop gardens are kind of push you in that direction, but don't force you if you're not interested. So you can have your privacy if you want, but you also have the opportunity for community.
You also told me a historical detail I found fascinating that came out of the WPA, where there was actually federally funded design guides to public housing, where there were experts who came in and helped people arrange their apartments. Could you describe that?
In New York, there was a team of 3 interior designers, they were all men, who would come into a family that was moving out of tenements and newly moving into public housing. And they would help them custom design the interior of their apartment so it would be optimal. Including across the street from, I think it was First Houses, there was a furniture building workshop where you could build your own custom furniture to fit this kind of new apartment that you were getting that was so much bigger and better than your tenement. If we had that now, I can only imagine the possibilities that you would have in public housing, but the idea that that existed to me is phenomenal. I mean, that's a true service. So I think that's something that could be brought into the 21st century for sure.
Derek, we're continuing on the whole notion of ownership. One of the things that I think you wrote about that didn't raise in your presentation was the future of a service economy, where on the one hand, you're endorsing fixing things that we own, but on the other hand, you were speaking quite supportively of the notion that objects that we would use would really be for lease, right, rather than owned. Do you want to describe that a little bit more?
I think it's something that's happening in a really encouraging way with a company like Carrier, or with Carrier making refrigeration and air conditioning equipment, and they consider themselves now a service company rather than a manufacturer. So you're not buying an air conditioner from Carrier, you're buying cold air from Carrier, and they sign a contract with you to keep your office or your home at 72 degrees, and however they do that is up to them. And the net result has been an integration of repair and maintenance into the design process. And you're getting that kind of really good technical and field experience back up higher, upstream in the design process. So that sort of model is working with other companies in Europe in ways that are really exciting and interesting, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. And it does have interesting connections with the supportive housing model. You're just setting up ways for people to take care of things in different ways. You open the possibility for something to be fixed, or you extend that, make that easy, essentially. And there's lots of other examples for that. When you buy something that has a lithium battery, now by law, you have to be given an envelope to return it. So it's easier to not throw it away and not dispose of it in an incorrect way. And that sort of legislation is supportive, and we can do better with the things we've already got.
I love that you brought up toasters, because it's one of my favorite subjects, and I share a certain fondness for a Sunbeam toaster from the 40s that you love as well. What do you think of that student in the UK who built his own toaster from scratch?
That was a postgraduate project. I'm trying to think. Thomas Thwaites was his name, and it was a really interesting thought experiment that was unfortunately incredibly resource and materials intensive. He drove all over the UK, and he used a microwave oven that he had broken into pieces in his yard to smelt the steel. And it was interesting because he called attention to sort of the dirty part of the process of manufacturing that we don't often idolize or get to see much of, and called attention just to how amazing it is that we can walk into a store and buy a toaster for $10 that's perfectly safe and that works for a year or two before it craps out. You know, there really is something there, actually. And we have something to learn and can be grateful for these amazing cheap things that we have. And they can be fixed too. You know, there's workshops in New York City for fixing your plastic bags when they rip holes in them. You know, you can fix cheap, unremarkable things just like you can fix amazing heirlooms and expensive electronics.
Finally, Daniel, do you have any comments you would like to make about your fellow presenters and their work?
Aside from them being great, I think, let's see, Derek, I mean, when I looked at your paper and I saw your presentation, it had this, it was great because it's something that I don't think about a lot, and it seemed like such a ripe topic for critical thought. It was one of those things where now I'm thinking about it a lot, and this issue of repair. I mean, I haven't thought about it. You had that thing about, what was the last thing you had repaired? Probably your shoes. And I'm like, yeah, that was the last thing I had repaired. As a New Yorker, was my shoes. And so I think you've just identified a really great avenue for critical thought. I think it's something that we need to bring back into the something we need to do more of and think more about. And I think that it could use some critical thought and the kind of thought you're bringing to it. So all I would say is, like, keep going. And Erin, I completely agree 100% with everything you said. I feel the same way about. I'm a little more sympathetic to Hope 6, but that's okay. But you identified the right issue there, that it results in a net loss of units, and that's what really matters. I love the hip-hop references, and I can't wait to go download the Spotify CD mix. What do we call it? Anyway, but the pictures you showed, it's so important to show the good things, to be able to be critical of public housing, but to be able to not be critical of the people who live in public housing, and to be able to kind of be critical of the system, but then to be able to go in and show what a actually cool place Marcy Homes is to live some ways, how there's a Marcy Homes Day, and how it's an organized constituency. And so just that balance of criticism and also appreciation and just showing us the good is like a really hugely important attitude that we don't find enough, I think, in planning. So keep that up. So yeah, keep going. What can I say? It's
and
great.
I'd like to say, Erin and I both are really big fans of Daniel as well. This love fest goes all the way around the stage, but how important it is to Decrit to have really thoughtful, optimistic practitioners who are willing to come in and sit under a microscope in a certain sense and participate in this process as it happens. So,
high fives all around.
Thanks to all three of you. And I think we're ready for our next break.